want you to lose your pertinency. I don't want you to lose your pertinency. They said they wanted to agree.
Ask that we face the flag and give the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Councilman Norris will lead us in our invocation.
We are humbled to know that we're loved tonight by you, Lord. We thank you for life and the beauty that you bring to us each day. We don't want to take it for granted ever. Thank you for those who've gone before us to bring freedom around the world to a lot of different people. And we enjoy that, and we thank you, Lord, for the blessings of it. Be with us tonight, many different needs, but especially to the police officer in Bowling Green, Lord. We ask that you'll spare his life and bring him back to good health. Thank you again for your love. In Jesus' name, amen.
Thank you, Freddie. You may be seated. We'll ask Clerk Simmons to call the roll.
Bennell.
Present.
Gauntz. Kirkpatrick.
Yes, ma'am.
Lowry.
Yes.
Marion.
Yes, ma'am.
Neal. Yes. Norris.
Yes.
Trigg. Witcher.
Thank you. We have 100% attendance, and glad everybody is here tonight. The next thing we need to do is you've had since Thursday the proposed agenda. I would ask for a motion that we proceed utilizing the agenda that was sent to you. Motion. All right, by Marion. Is there a second?
Second, Kirkpatrick.
Any discussion? All in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
And opposed, like sign. The agenda as sent to you has been approved. So we will move forward with that agenda. The first item on the agenda being to approve the minutes of the last council meeting we had back on the 26th day of June. I'll entertain a motion. If you've had a chance to look over those minutes that came in your packet, I would entertain a motion to approve those. Motion by Neal. Okay, is there a second? Second by Neal. Any discussion on the minutes as presented? All right, all in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. Minutes are approved and in the record. Let's move forward with some old business. We have the second reading of an important ordinance tonight. Rich, if you want to provide that for us.
Yes, sir. That whereas the City of Glasgow has adopted an occupational license fee ordinance providing for an occupational license fee of 1 3/4% on certain wages paid to employees in the city. Whereas NEBAC USA has made an application for certain benefits and incentives available to it under the Kentucky Business Investment Program as a result of its commitment to expand or upgrade its Glasgow facility to support a potential EV client. Whereas the Kentucky Economic Development Finance Authority has preliminarily approved the KBI incentives. Whereas the City of Glasgow's council is willing, as one of the incentives, to permit the retention by NEMAC of 1% of the occupational tax revenues to be paid by employees of said company, recognizing that said company's expanded economic presence in the city would enhance the economic property of Glasgow. And whereas the City Council wishes to demonstrate its willingness to accept the measure of retention of said payment or deduction by said company as described above, be it hereby ordained by the City of Glasgow as follows. Section 1, the City of Glasgow takes notice of the application of NEMAC USA for benefits and incentives available to it under the Kentucky Business Investment Program administered through the Kentucky Economic Development Finance Authority, including the application by said company for retention of or rebate to said company of 1% of the 1 3/4% occupational tax revenues to be paid by employees of the company. Section 2, that the approval herein granted is subject to said company receiving final approval of its application and meeting all terms and conditions of its eligibility for said benefits under the Kentucky Business Investment Program. Section 3, that the City of Glasgow does hereby ordain that for 10 years subsequent to the activation date, as that term is established by and among the Kentucky Economic Development Finance Authority, NEMAC, and the Barron County Economic Authority, NEMAC shall be entitled to retain or to have rebated to it 1% of the 1 3/4% occupational license fee which would otherwise be paid by employees of the company from their respective salaries and wages. The 1% retention or rebate shall not apply to other income or net profits of the company and shall apply only to occupational license fees on wages paid to employees in the city, sometimes called payroll taxes. Further, the retention or rebate shall apply only to new employees added by NEMAC's base as reported to the Kentucky Economic Development Finance Authority when applying for these incentives. Section 4, this ordinance shall take effect upon its passage and publication according to law.
You've heard the second reading of the ordinance. I would entertain a motion to approve second reading.
Motion.
Okay, by Councilman Marion. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, is there any discussion on second reading of this ordinance? All right, being an ordinance, we need to have a roll call vote. Mona?
Kirkpatrick,
Yes, ma'am.
Lowry,
Yes.
Marion,
Yes, ma'am.
Neal,
Yes.
Norris,
Yes.
Trigg,
Yes.
Witcher,
Yes.
Benel,
Yes.
Gaunt.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, the ordinance passes unanimously. Thank you very much. We'll let Ms. Maureen Carpenter, who has been waiting for us to get this approved, know so that we can move forward with our obligation there to NEMAC. Let's see, up next we have some new business, which is the presentation of our audit by Taylor, Polson and Company. And I really think what I'd like to do, let's start with familiar faces. I'm going to ask Belinda Coulter, who has for a long time presented our audit, if you will introduce the party that's with you and who's going to be doing the speaking, because we're familiar with it, Belinda. So come on, and let's welcome our friends from Taylor, Polson.
I love this 6 o'clock meeting rather than 7 o'clock. It's close to my bedtime. This is Jeff Carter, one of our partners, and I'm trying to head towards retirement a little at a time, but Jeff's been auditing with the firm for a number of years and been a partner for a couple of years, and so I'm going to let him take it tonight, and I'll sit by in case there's any problems or questions.
Thank you, Jeff. Welcome. Glad to have you.
Jennifer's been the lead auditor for several years now. Jennifer Phillips.
Hi, Jennifer.
Thank you, Mayor. What each of you should have is in the black binder, the actual audit report, and that's where we're going to start. And where I will turn your direction to is on page 6. Page 6, 7, 8, and 9. The audit report this year has been redesigned, and we're going to start right off with opinion in the first paragraph, or the first paragraphs here. So, in the second paragraph, it states our opinion on the financial statements. The first paragraph tells what we audited. The second paragraph is our opinion, and it says based on our audit and the report of the other auditors, the financial statements referred to above present fairly in all material respects the respective financial position of the governmental activities, the aggregate discretely presented component units, each major fund, and the aggregate remaining fund information of the City of Glasgow, Kentucky as of June 30th, 2022, and the respective changes in financial position for the years that ended in accordance with accounting principles generally accepted in the United States of America. So what that opinion is in terminologies, it's a unmodified opinion, or if you go back, when I first started out, I think it had been an unqualified opinion, or going back even further, a clean opinion on there. So, depending on which terminology you're used to hearing. Okay. The rest of the report organizes, and it tells what the basis of the opinion was. I'm not going to read each of these paragraphs to you, but that is the basis of what we based our opinion on. It tells what our responsibilities are for the financial statements and the audit, what all we looked at, what risk we attained. Then it tells the responsibility of the management was before there, management's responsibility, which means management is responsible for all the numbers that are in this financial statement. Okay? Then it goes on to what required supplementary information is, and what other supplementary information is, and then the other audit report under governmental auditing standards, which is reported in the back. Okay? So, I'll turn your attention, starting on page 10 through this next section. This is management discussion and analysis, and I usually stay here for a minute because this is where you can get a comparison of what the city has done compared to the prior years. Now, we're talking about 6/30/22 as compared to June 30th, 21. So on page 13, it shows you that your current assets increased around $200,000 from 27.4 million compared to 27.2 million in 21. Your capital assets increased about $600,000 from 36.7 million in 21 to 37.3 million in 22. And your total assets increased around $800,000 from 64 million to 64.8 million. Go to the next section down, we'll show your liabilities, and it showed that your liabilities, your long-term liabilities, which is your debt, decreased from 36.0 million to 31.5 million, some 4.5 million, 5 million there. And then at the bottom, it shows your net position of the city of Glasgow, and the total net position was 31.7 million in 21. It's 31.8 million. It's an increase of a little around $50,000 for the year. Okay. I will tell you, if you have any questions, stop me at any time, or just yell at me, and I'll stop and entertain any questions you have. Okay. I'll turn to the next page 15. And page 15 is a statement of activities, which is basically an income statement. And as it shows, your total revenues for 22 increased from 6.4 million in 21 to 8.3 million in 22. Your general revenues increased from 13.9 million to 15.6 million. Now, your general revenues is your property taxes and payroll taxes and other taxes and things of that nature. Your total expenses, they increased from a total of 22.6 million to a 23.9, and the excess before transfers was 89,000 in 22. Your transfers was 35,438, and your change in that position was the 54,000. Okay. The next sections of this goes into what I basically went over in a little more detail, and then it talks about your capital assets and your debt. So if we'll turn on over to page 19 and 20, this is that same statement, but it is in just a 22 format, and it is the details of what made up your total assets, your current assets, and your liabilities in more detail, and then what makes up the net position in detail. So next page 21 and 22, that is your statement of activities, and concludes on page 23. That is the same statement that I went over of the income statement comparison. It is kind of laid out a little different. It starts with your expenses, then it shows all your income netting against them. And if you turn to page 23, your change in net position was $54,321. Now, the component units, which is the electric plant board and water company, its change in net position was an increase of $2 million. That's in the far right column on component units. Pardon? And the airport board is in there as well. We turn to page 24 and 25. This is the balance sheet on the fund basis. The difference is the balance sheet does not show all the debt or the fixed assets, capital assets in it. So if you look at the first column, the general fund has total assets of $9.4 million. Your sanitation landfill has $10.7 million in total assets. Your other governmental funds has $7.3, and the total assets for governmental funds on the fund basis, $27.4 million. Your liabilities is $1.5 million in the general, $2.6 in the sanitation, $27,000 in your other funds, and the total is $4.2 million. And then down at the bottom, it shows your fund balance. You have a $7.8 million fund balance in the general fund, of which 1.2 is restricted. You have $8.1 million in the sanitation landfill, of which all of that is committed. And then you have your other governmental funds, which some is non-spendable, some is restricted, and some is committed, for the total $7.2 million. And then the total for the city is $23.4 million. Page 26 reconciles that financial statement to the very first financial statement of net position, shows the changes to get back to the reconciliation of $31 million, and that is all mostly to do with the capital assets and the debt and the pension information. Page 27 and 28, it's a statement of revenues and expenditures, changes in fund balances. Shows your general revenues in the general fund of $18.5 million. The sanitation landfill is $4.4 million. Your other governmental funds is $1.2 million, and your total revenues for the city is $24.1 million. Your expenditures was $18.2 million. Sanitation was $5.2. The other was $1.3, and the total for the city was $24.8. Shows that you had an excess in the general fund of $280,000. You had a deficiency of $834 in the sanitation landfill. You had a deficiency in your other funds of $136,000, and you had a total deficiency of $690,000. And if you turn to the next page, it shows your transfers between the funds, and it will show your net change. You had a $132,000 change in fund balance in the general, a $1.1 million loss in the sanitation, and a $281,000 profit in the other governmentals. And then it shows your ending fund balance. Total loss for the city is $726,000 on the fund basis. Page 31 reconciles that loss on the fund basis, which is kind of a cash basis, to the full accrual basis of the profit of $54,000. And it shows what those changes are, and most of them to do with debt and capital outlays. Next statement is a statement of changes in fiduciary net position, and the total cash is $19.5 million. Your net position is $19.5 million. I mean, $19,585. I'm sorry, $19,585. Page 33 shows the additions: $15,000 from the general fund, benefits of $14,000, change was $679. The total net position is $19,585. If you go to page 34 and 35, this is the component units. It shows your balance sheet of the water company, the electric plant board, and the airport board, and it shows the net positions of each of them. So the water company had 69.3 million in assets, 20.6 million in liabilities, and a net position of 48.8. Electric plant board has 56.1 million in assets, 36.4 in liabilities, net position of 20 million. And the airport has 6.2 million in assets, only 5,000 in liabilities, and a total net position of 6.2 million. Page 36 shows the income statement, basically combining statement of activities for each of those component units. So the water company had a profit of change in net position, which was a profit of $738,000. The electric plant board had a $1.8 million change, and the airport lost $530,000. The total for all component units is $2 million. Yes. That's true. We audited the airport. The airport board this year was audited by Taylor Polson and Company. The water company is audited by Campbell Myers Rutledge. The electric plant board is audited by Carr-Riggs and Ingram, different firms. And we have to review those audit reports before we put them in there and agree that we agree with those, what their findings was, if there was any findings, and what their opinion on the units was, and we accepted those opinions. Your next section is the notes to the financial statement. I am not going to read those. I'll leave them to you. I will point out just a couple, page 51 and 52, and 53, that is your capital assets. That is where your, talks about your land, your building, and the values, what was added, what was retired, and what the ending balances were, how much has been depreciated on them. Page 50, starting at page 56, begins talking about the debt and what your debt outlays will be. So on page 61, shows your balances at the beginning of the year, the balances at the end of the year, and what is due within the next year on the debt. And then down at the bottom shows what's due over the next several years on that page. We'll move to page 84 and 85. That is the budget compared to actual. The first column shows the original budget that was passed at the beginning of last year. The next column shows your final after all amendments to the budget, and then it compares it to the actual and shows your variance. So you budgeted on your final budget for 19.1 million revenues. You actually had 18.5 million. That was a negative variance of 599,000. However, you budgeted total expenditures of 19.7 million. You only actually expended 18.2 million, so that's a favorable variance of 1.4 million, which means when we come down to the bottom, the net change, you'd actually budgeted for a $653,000 loss. You had an actual profit of $132,000 on the budget basis, and the variance is a $785,000 variance there. Page 86 is your sanitation and landfill budget to actual. And it's laid out in the same way that I just described. So the final budget was 4.2 million. You actually had revenues of 4.4. It's favorable 149,000. You budgeted 5.2 in expenditures. You had 5.2 in expenditures. You had a favorable variance though of 13,000. And your net change in fund balance, you budgeted for a $1.3 million loss. You had a $1.1 million loss, so that was favorable $162,000. Any questions? Your next section gives you a lot more breakdowns. And then, I'm not going to go through all of them, but starting on 96, that shows each other fund that was in the total other funds in the front section, like the cemetery fund, the upkeep fund, road aid fund, and all those funds, gives you the details of all those funds and what each fund did during the year. So if we'll turn to page 114, I'll point out that that is your federal grant expenditures for the year, the money that you received. The bottom is the COVID-19 that was received during the year of 2022. Your total federal expenditures was $2.5 million for 2022. The next page talks about the footnotes to it. And then we'll get to the auditor's report under governmental auditing standards. And it's laid out that talks about report on internal control, describes what a deficiency in internal control was, what a significant deficiency in material weakness is. And as we say there on page 117, the second paragraph, given the limitations of the audit, we did not identify any deficiencies in internal control that we consider to be material weaknesses. However, they could exist but not been identified. And then the other report on compliance and other matters, that report states that the results of the test disclose no instances of noncompliance or other matters that are required to be reported. Page 118, it's a very similar financial statement. Very similar report, but it's based only on the major program federal awards. And in the opinion here, it says the City of Glasgow's basic financial statements included the operations of the water company and electric plant board. Tells that. Third paragraph in her opinion, the City of Glasgow, Kentucky complied in all material respects with the types of compliance requirements referred to that could have had a direct and material effect on the major federal awards for June 30th, 2022. That is also an unmodified opinion or a clean opinion. And then it goes to our basis for that report, their responsibilities, management's responsibilities. And then it talks on page 120, the report on internal control, and we did not identify any internal control weaknesses concerned with major programs. Page 121 is the summary of those results that I've just went over, and tells what the major program was and what our thresholds was for determining that. Any questions?
Jeff, I had just a couple of questions. The first question, when we talk about on the liability section of our pension liability, of course that's the largest component of our liability section, and where do you see that going? It may be more of a direct question to Stephanie on that, but as far as we went up about $7 million on that, so.
You're talking about...
Yeah, looking at page 19 of the balance sheet, our net pension liability section.
Well, okay. Those numbers on the pension, the related pension, and the net pension liability, and the net OPEB liability, and the deferred inflows and outflows, those numbers come from the state of Kentucky, as they are proportioned to the City of Glasgow. So it's been about the same. The good thing was there for a couple of years they didn't increase the rates, but they did this past year. Glasgow's share compared to the whole state on that number for hazardous was 0.537%. Non-hazardous is 0.128%. So when you look at those numbers, and they are large, but they're relatively small compared to the rest of the state of Kentucky when you take it as a whole. And it's hard to say, what that is. What they did when they did that is they put each city and each city council on notice that if there was a pension failure it came about because there was some pension failures, that this is what the city's liability could possibly be. Therefore, when they did that, you had to record it on the books, but it comes directly from the state. There's nothing that Stephanie can do or any of us can do because it's straight out from their actuarial report on that. Okay?
What makes it difficult to have meaning, I guess, is that the state valuation that he's talking about is a year prior to
Okay.
your reporting. And so, and then depending on, what rates have done since then as far as their investments, and it's kind of a guessing game.
So we're going to see more fluctuation in that, or are we going to the leveling out point of that, or any indication?
Well, it depends, of course, on the market, what it does, and as you know, that's been up and down the last couple of years, and so these numbers were based on the valuation as of June 30th, 21 of the plan. And the 1 year, sometimes other defined benefit plans have seen a swing drastic from 1 year to the next because of rates, or maybe they threw some more money in. Of course, you all are told how much money you got to throw at it. It's not a choice that you have. So.
The other thing I'll point out, Melinda, too, is back in the back, the schedule of cities' contributions, page 89. That's the OPEB, I think. No, that's pension. Page 89 and 90. The city, for hazardous, 1.4 million. Non-hazardous responsibility by the city was 852,000. The total that was made by the city was 1.5 million, and there's no deficiency in the contributions made by the city, which means the city is making the contributions that it's required to make, that the state's requiring it to make each year. Okay, so there's no deficiency there. It's not that you're not paying in. It's the fact that if it failed today, or if everybody in the state of Kentucky said, I'm retiring today, they wouldn't have they wouldn't have the money to pay out the benefits over what they're saying the life expectancy of someone would be. Okay?
So they're not the governor, piggybacking on what he was saying about the pension plan. They said they were responsible on the pension plan this year.
For this year. Okay. You keep in mind, we're looking at 21 numbers that are in the 22 audit. Okay?
So then next year, then it should show the existing liability.
Well, it either show that the liability stayed the same, or the liability, if they do what they're projected.
I guess the point, we as a council got to realize that that's continuing liability of the city, and that's an obligation that we have out into the future. So, as we look at this balance sheet, this financial statement, that's out there, and we see it what it is today, but down the road, that could be higher or lower. I would dare say it's going to be higher. It's not going to be lower, but again, that's an estimate that I'm making. So, for us always to keep that in front of us as a council and making decisions on finances for the city. And the second question I had is, were there any major adjustments that had to be made in the audit?
Well, what I was going to tell you, there is a second letter here,
Okay, I'm sorry.
and I'm not going to go through all the adjustments and everything, but I'll cover this letter real quick with you. And the letter is to the members of the council and the mayor. It talks about the significant audit matters, which is the qualified aspects of the accounting practices, and it describes what is the two things there. One being the estimate of the closure and post-closure care. That is an estimate. That's a sensitive estimate. The other one is the pension and the OPEB, which we just talked about being a sensitive estimate because it's an estimate coming from the state of Kentucky on that, okay? It goes on to says financial statements, disclosures are neutral and clear. There was no difficulties in performing the audit. And then we talk about the corrected and uncorrected misstatements. You can see them there. The first two, that they are uncorrected. They're immaterial, and they're all due with timing, meaning that if we had corrected them, then we would have to reverse them because they're going to be picked up in this year because of the timing of when they come in, okay? The next one there is the one that is a material adjustment that was made. It decreased your assets. It decreased your revenues. And it made a change in net position fund balance on there. Okay? So yes, there was some adjustments that were made. Terry, and if you want to know specifics, get with me and we can pull those adjustments out and show you exactly what they were on that. Okay? There was no disagreements with management. The representation letter was signed. To our knowledge, there's been no consultation with any other auditors or accountants. We do talk about some other little other audit findings, which I think is a repeated one that's been in there before about particularly when you have changes in the things, making sure everything is in a accounting manual. And then there is other matters. There is no other matters to report on that. Okay. Any questions? Any other questions?
So is this sheet, explain a little bit on page 117, you said weakness is not identified, so this is about that then, to some extent.
Weakness is not identified. There's no material weakness. When I talk about that, that means there's no weaknesses in your internal control. Everything's operating the way that it should be operating. Now, what we talk about here and other findings or whatever is while all your controls are there and in place and operating, and Stephanie knows the controls, they're not really, if something happened to Stephanie, they're not really written down for the next person coming in. And some of them are, but not all of them in full detail. Okay, so that's what we're talking about, is trying to make sure that everything, if something happens, there's a clear accounting manual there on that. But that's not a weakness, because all the internal controls that are here and that they're doing are working properly. They're just not. This one has this internal control and this one document. They're not consolidated in one concise document where they could hand it to us. Each of them has their own, basically.
I'll just scratch my head on that.
That's fine. Mayor, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all for the hospitality.
Thank you.
I had a quick question for you. For those here or watching online or listening online that may not know, can you describe the restricted amount, please? For instance, on page 24, we'll just use that one as an example.
You're talking about the restricted cash? Okay. So, restricted fund balance, the 1.2 million, is that what you're asking?
Yeah, can you let us know where is that coming in at? It's being restricted from?
It's restricted, it's your cash and investments up there right above, restricted assets of cash and investments. What actually?
I think the investment, CDs, that main project is the mid, that's the bulk of it. And then there's some police funds for, restitution.
Certain.
That are restricted funds, this refers to that, as compared to
It's-
committed or assigned, refers to an external restriction.
Usually the government,
Or a lender or something.
such as the state of Kentucky lender,
So that's not accessible is what you're saying, correct?
it's really supposed to be used for those purposes. Yeah.
Thanks.
Anything else? It's a good presentation. I want to thank you all for being here, and I also want to remind remind our council members that this is the first time we have seen it. Stephanie and Maddie and I went over it this morning, but nobody expects anybody here to digest it all tonight. And I do feel like that the folks at Taylor Polson are certainly welcoming for you to call up and ask questions like that, Max, because it is hard to understand, but when you break it down, every line by line, it all makes sense, but it's not something that we should, I mean, I don't feel bad not being able to understand it all tonight, but we have what we need here to be able to understand what the financial standing for the city of Glasgow is, and the way that it's being managed, and the way that it's being prepared for the next year, future, whatever the case is. Is that a fair thing to say, Jeff?
Yes, that's what I was going to end with, Mayor, is take these home, you get to looking at them. Hey, I wanted to ask you a question. Give me a call, or give Belinda or Jennifer a call. We'll sit down with you, we'll pull the work papers out and go right over where each number actually in more detail came from on that. Okay.
All right.
Thank you,
If there's no other discussion, thank you very much for being here, and good report. Let's see. The next thing we need to do is talk about the pending list of appointments. We have some that are going to be, are this, some of these second reading tonight, or just all on the pending appointments?
Tonight was the first notification.
Okay, so we don't have to vote on anything
No,
tonight.
sir.
But just be sure you read those in your agenda, because we will vote on them the next time, okay? Just be aware of that. If there's any questions about that. Let's see, I want to also come over here. We've got some announcements, but Chief Howie's been handing out invitations, little wedding-looking invitations up here. You want to tell us what this is about? I didn't mean to catch you off guard.
I believe at the last council meeting, I told you all about partnerships and working with the community. We're opening our first substation on Park Avenue, and we're having a ribbon cutting on the 20th, so y'all come out. And I'm sure with any good police station, there may be a gun on it too to be had.
Sure. And I understand that the work is coming along quite nicely out there, and it's going to be something that we can be proud to hang that police insignia on it, for sure.
Absolutely. Yes, sir.
Okay.
Looks good.
All right, very good. Thank you, sir. Appreciate all of your work in planning that out. Also coming up on Wednesday night, the Louisville Orchestra. We've had two different times based on time zones, but it is official. It's the Louisville Orchestra will perform at 7:30 on Wednesday night, right out front right here, expecting an excellent crowd. They've got a wonderful program planned. It's something that people look forward to, and we want to be sure and see you down there and having a very special evening as the Louisville Orchestra. They really do love coming to Glasgow, and I made this comment earlier today. Teddy Abrams has been the instructor or the conductor for a long time at the Louisville Orchestra. He's actually for the first time going to be performing Wednesday night. He's actually going to play the piano on George Gershwin's Rhapsody in Blue. So it'll be kind of interesting to see somebody change positions a little bit for that. So we're looking forward to that as a part of the Louisville Orchestra. The next council meeting, according to my notes right here, is going to be on Monday, July the 24th at 6 o'clock right here. And if I don't see anything else, so maybe we would entertain a motion to adjourn this meeting of the council.
Motion.
All right, we have Ms.
Second
Marna
Morris.
and Mr. Freddie. Any discussion? All in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. Everybody have a wonderful evening.